Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you, and thanks for joining us for the webinar today, Aligning Workforce Strategy and Skills in the Age of AI. I am really excited to be here with some esteemed guests to engage in a conversation that I think we're all having, be it in the workplace, in social settings, on the street corner, at school drop-off. I feel like we're at a point now where we can't stop speculating about the impact of AI and what it might mean for all of us, let alone the organizations that we work in. We can say that artificial intelligence is no longer something in the future. It's here. It's reshaping jobs. It's changing roles. It's changing organizations. And I also think we can ask the question, is it really? And that's part of what we're going to talk about today. My name is Jessica Modrall. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Orgvue. I'm joined today by Casey Newton and Ross Sparkman. Casey is the founder of Platformer and also the co-host of the New York Times podcast, Hard Fork. Ross is the head of strategic workforce planning at Nutrien, the author of a book on the same topic, and has had an esteemed career across sectors in this space. So true expertise on both sides of the aisle as we get going today. So we'll think about today how AI is impacting organizations, how we might think about reskilling as a strategic priority, and also what leaders can do to build the workforce for what's next. So I'm going to start with a quick pulse check. Let's do a hot take. On a scale of cautious to wildly optimistic, that being maybe 5, how are you feeling about AI's impact on the workforce? Let's start with you, Ross. Where are you feeling today?
I am definitely on the more pretty optimistic side. And I'd say that is largely because I really become a power user myself. And so I have seen really the true opportunity that the technology presents. And I've also had the opportunity to really work on some of these AI transformations and strategies at now my second organization, and have seen firsthand, when done correctly, what opportunity the technology really presents. So I'm pretty bullish that there's going to be some pretty large impacts if done right, if rolled out right.
Okay, 5 out of 5. Casey, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of depends on like what time frame you're talking about. But I think that over the long term, like I am basically at a 5. I do think that AI is just going to transform work, full stop. I think in the short to medium term, I'm probably somewhere closer to a 3. You know, there are a lot of cool tools. There's some nifty tricks you can do, but we're still sort of in an experimentation phase. And not all those experiments are paying off, as I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah, absolutely. So we kind of have to think about the promise of AI broadly, like we're starting to see that fruit. To what degree are we at the point where we're replacing jobs, we're replacing work, we're able to like fill in for the human, right? Probably a second dimension. And then finally, as I think, those of us who work in large scale transformation might ask, how ready are organizations to adapt, right? I've heard you talk about that, Casey, as well. And I'm sure that's part of the experience for us that you're living, as you mentioned, to customers. So we have to decouple those when we think about the real impact, right? And they might be at different places. I guess the question that part of what we want to get to today is, how real is this challenge, right? How real is the problem to be solved today? And how can we think about equipping those on the line with some practical tips to do that? So Casey, we'll start with you a little bit in terms of your experience. You've written about how AI is reshaping how organizations function. Curious, what are you seeing today? And do you think we're at a tipping point where leaders and employees need to respond to the shift yet? Are we there, or are we sort of rushing in to adapt?
Yeah, I mean, you really see the widest possible range of responses, right? There are still businesses that haven't begun to think about this. There are businesses where there's what I would call a very top-down approach to implementing AI, where it's the CEO who's, running down the hallways telling everyone that they need to, incorporate X percentage of AI into everything that they're doing. And then you have the organizations that I think are actually more successful here, which is the ones where you're seeing a more bottom-up approach, right? Where maybe the C-suite isn't paying as much attention to it, but individual workers or teams are saying, hey, if we use this tool, we can actually get rid of a lot of the tedium in our lives and maybe, unlock some extra hours for us to work on something else. So that's kind of the range that I'm seeing, and happy to talk more about it.
Yeah, it's an interesting sort of question. We all are adapting, right, to how we can use the technology to help ourselves. Ross, how are you seeing that kind of play out in the organizations that you work with?
Yeah, as being sort of on the front lines and have been sort of on the early journey of kind of rolling this out in my last organization at Walmart, I would actually echo Casey's sentiments. It really, there's, I would say, different perspectives on, from a C-suite all the way down to kind of individual contributor, what the technology means, how it can be used, when it should be used, and why it should be used. And I think that, the organizations that are really being thoughtful and strategic and thinking end to end about what needs to actually happen from a truly end-to-end infrastructure perspective to training employees to a communications perspective are the ones that are, to your earlier, more prepared. I think that the organizations that are maybe more skeptical or are not being as thoughtful about how they want to use the technology or start to build it into workflows, and are maybe just kind of more throwing the kitchen sink at the problem with just assuming that the technology is the technology and that's going to solve all the problems, and just sort of not take a more strategic, thoughtful approach, are the ones that maybe are not quite as ready. So it really is almost depends on the individual, the leader, and the organization that you talk to.